Hello mi gente and welcome back to Nata Knows Best. Today we are making Puerto Rican Picadillo. This is a ground beef recipe that is included in several Puerto Rican dishes. I've actually used this recipe in my empanadas video. I've also used this recipe in my sweet plantain lasagna, aka pastelon. So for those of you who have been watching my channel, you may be familiar with this recipe, but I figured let me just give you a dedicated video for something that is super easy and super delicious. So let's get into it. If you guys have been watching my channel for a while, you already know that the most important condiment in Puerto Rican food is sofrito. So of course, this picadillo recipe is going to start with a homemade sofrito. If you guys need a sofrito recipe, I will link mine right here for you guys. I literally use this in every single Puerto Rican recipe that I make. It is something I love. It is from scratch. It is super aromatic and fresh, and I highly, highly recommend it. So this recipe will start with my sofrito. It will also include some tomato sauce, ground beef. I usually use a lean ground beef because I feel like it's easier to work with. It has less oil, so you don't always have to drain all that excess that you find. And then of course, you can season it to taste. So I'm gonna grab a pan and get started. Okay, so I have my pan here and it's on medium heat. And I'm going to add a little bit of olive oil. And I mean a little bit of olive oil just because we are going to be using ground beef. And even if you use a lean ground beef, it still releases its natural oils. So just to control the amount of oil, we're only gonna use a little bit. So I would say maybe a tablespoon, maybe, might be less. So now that our oil is nice and hot, I'm going to add in our homemade sofrito. Now remember, this is sofrito that I made in bulk and I've had it in the freezer just waiting for whenever I'm ready to use it. So I'm going to add in 1/3 cup. I'm just going to let it cook down until it starts becoming aromatic. You can see some of the onions in there. In my sofrito recipe, I like using a combination of culantro and cilantro. I also love adding ají dulces. So I'm just gonna let that cook down. And to our sofrito, I'm going to add equal parts of tomato sauce. Now you can also add tomato paste. That will give you a stronger tomato flavor if that's something that you want. And again, I'm just going to cook everything together for about maybe 3 minutes. Up next is our ground beef. Remember, this is lean ground beef. I would say this is roughly about 1 pound. Now for full ingredients and measurements, my picadillo recipe will be listed down in the description box. It will also be on my website, which is nataknowsbest.com. While our picadillo is cooking, I'm gonna go ahead and start seasoning. So I'm going to add a packet of sazon. You can season your picadillo to taste. So if you don't want to use sazon or you want to make your own sazon from scratch, feel free to do so. I'm also going to season our picadillo with some adobo. I'm going to add in some cumin. And lastly, I'm also going to add in some oregano. You can hear our delicious picadillo simmering away. Last minute, I did decide to add in some diced green peppers and diced red peppers just because I wanted some extra color. And I also added a pinch of salt as I was tasting everything. The one thing I have not added is the stuffed olives. Now, that's just personal preference. I am not a fan of olives in my picadillo. However, olives are traditional in Puerto Rican picadillo. So if you like it traditional, feel free to add in your olives. The first thing you want to do though is drain them before adding them in. In the meantime, since we added all of our ingredients, I'm going to allow the ground beef to simmer for another 5 minutes, and then I'll take it off. If you plan on using this picadillo recipe for empanadas, I highly recommend adding cubed potatoes in the meat while it's simmering. Alright, mi gente, there you have it. That's how I make my version of Puerto Rican picadillo. I served myself some right here just to give you guys a taste. As I said before, this recipe is pretty much a staple in a lot of ground beef dishes. So if you're planning on making Puerto Rican empanadillas, you can use this recipe as your meat filling. If you want to make that sweet plantain lasagna that I mentioned, which is what we call pastelon, you can go ahead and use this recipe as well. It's super easy to make, as you guys could see, and it's always so delicious. I will be linking this recipe to my playlist, which is called Not That Knows Boricua. This is a playlist that I've created that has all of my favorite Puerto Rican recipes, so go check that out. I will also be putting this recipe on my website, which is again notthatknowsbest.com. Stay tuned next week for another delicious recipe. And as always, mi gente, thank you so much for watching Not That Knows Best.